Okay, let's try this. So today we have two lecturers. We have one lecturer and two lectures on tendering, and then on contracts. So they kind of lead from one into the other really, and they kind of lead from the lectures we had last week. Let me just check to see if this thing is recording. I'm slightly panicking, but so yes, that's good. Um, so last week we talked about procurement and ethics. So this is really more about procurement, which leads on to tendering. So with procurement, what we do is we decide how we are going to get a builder to build the building. Let me just turn off my email because this thing will be bing bonging all day otherwise. Okay. So tendering is really about how one gets a firm offer, right? So a tender really is to offer or to present something formally. So in the context of what we do in the context of construction, what it is we are getting a builder to tender on one of our projects so that they will give us a firm offer and to execute the works according to the documents that we give out to them. All right, so this is specifically in the context of architects being involved in the process. So if we go back to last week's procurement, if we go back to last week's procurement lecture, really we're only talking about the kind of lump sum type procurement method, which is where architects can be involved. So you can see that if we have a design and construct procurement method, then the architect isn't involved in the tender, although a tender may well still be called. So this is really geared towards the architect being involved in the process, but it's not to say that there's not other kinds of tenders in construction. That's not to say that architects have to be involved in everything in calling tenders. Let me say that. So really, what we're looking at here is today these 9 different things. So really, the main ways of tendering for construction is 1 to 5, and then 6 to 9 is really a bit more detailed that relate to each of 1 to 5. So just to recap from what I said a minute ago, a tender is to offer or to present something formally. In our case, the price and the conditions for construction by a specific time and date based on a set of tender documents, which will form then the basis for the contract. So the next lecture will be about contracts. So once we have a firm price and conditions that we've found through the tender process, we will then move on to signing the contract. So the first, oh, that's interesting. Bloody hell, what a disaster. What is going on? Okay, I see what's going on. Okay, so this is a bit too complex. I pirated these slides again from Robin Hardy, who gave this lecture 2 years ago. But when we talk about open tendering, really we're talking about for medium to large projects for organizations that require absolute transparency. Okay, so we're talking about people like governments or any organization that needs to be highly responsible to its people, its electorate, the people that put them in the place. So in terms of governments, it would be us. So we the electorate need to see that governments are actually putting in something that is completely transparent, which means that the system can't be, is less likely to be gamed or to be corrupted, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, any sort of tender, you can tender for anything, right? So people do tender for architectural services, but in this case, mostly we're talking about tendering for construction. So the first step in open tendering is really for a request for tender to be published in a public place, either traditionally in newspapers, when people used to read the physical form of newspapers, or nowadays on the web. So each state government, as well as the federal government, each state and territory government and the federal government has a tender portal. So things that they want prices for, they will put it on that portal. People will then go there and get the information and choose which ones they want to go for. So in the ACT, that's the actual portal there, so you can go and have a look at that. Now, one of the characteristics of this form of tendering is that tenders are open for everybody to respond to, although in some cases there may be restrictions on pre-qualification to make sure that they are qualified to do the job at the end of the day. So and quite often, of course, you would then have to prove that if there's no pre-qualification that may be asked for in the tender, that you have to prove that you've got a certain type of builder's registration and so on and so forth to be able to complete or undertake and complete the job. People who want to put in a tender are given a date to respond to that tender by, and then the offers are then assessed and a decision made on what to accept. So in the case of architectural projects, really what we do there is we have a set of tender documents which is made up of the drawings, the specifications, both of which prepared by the architect, and a blank contract, or maybe we just tell them which contract we want to use, as well as a tender form. So the tender form is really a form that they fill in when they return their tender. The tender form will then list out the information that they are required to submit, which includes, of course, the price according to the documents, their registrations, how long the construction is going to take, what they're going to charge in terms of labor per hour, and also the cost of trades per hour, and all this stuff is so we can check against what they're charging us for in the first place, and secondly, if there are any variations, we can then see how much that is going to be per hour. How they're going to finance the project, and we'll talk a bit more about this in when we come around the contracts. But essentially, when you build something, you need to have a pool of money to be able to pay for stuff before you get paid. So their form of financing may just be that we have to pay up front, or the client has to pay up front, and that's how they're going to finance it. But more often than not, they need to provide details of their banks and of their overdraft facility, so that we, as architects representing the client, know that they will be able to complete the project. So the last thing that we want for our client, the last thing clients really want, is for a project not to be able to be finished because the builder can't pay for stuff and doesn't have a financial facility to be able to pay for stuff. So we need to know they have that overdraft, or they have a bucket load of money in there that they're going to be able to pay for stuff. In fact, the bucket load of money doesn't work legally, because the bucket of money belongs to the builder. The builder can do anything they want with that. They can spend it the next day. We don't know. All we need is a guarantee from the bank in some form, an overdraft, or a bank guarantee that that amount of money is going to be available to the builder as they're going along. The process of doing it is, when you answer a tender, the first thing you need to do is you need to get the tender documents. So you need the drawings and specifications in order to be able to do your costing. Now, so Oh, sorry, before I get into that, the other things they will need in their tender forms would be their building insurance. Generally, these are companies that have a standing arrangement with builders, so they need a letter from that company to say that they will be insured for the construction. The capability to do the job, so this might be that they need to prove who they have working for them so that we have an ability to gauge whether they can finish the job or not, and the validity of their price or the period of validity of their price. So they might say, you know, this tender is valid for a month, for 2 weeks, whatever it is. They have to tell us so that we can actually make decisions in time, or else we have to tell them how long their price needs to be valid for. Okay, so that's the stuff that generally comes back in the tender form. Now, the process, they need to get the drawings. So in the old days, we used physical drawings. Basically, everybody got a set of paper drawings, and the tenderers, the builders who wanted the job, needed to give a deposit for those drawings, and the deposit was then refundable upon the return of the drawings. Okay, this is just a token sum of $500 to $1,000, really just so that the ownership of the drawings remain with the architect slash client. So nowadays, a lot of that stuff is of course available online. So they just download the PDFs and go and print them themselves to the instructions of the people issuing the drawings. Now, what then happens is that because we deal with complicated stuff, quite often there's questions that come back from one tender or another to do with the documents. You know, you haven't covered this. What are we going to do here, and so on and so forth. So as questions come back, there's a question and answer period. The person running the tender, generally the architect, then needs to answer those questions first of all, and then distribute the answers for those questions to all the tenderers so that everybody is on the same page. Okay, so this is a very transparent system, but it can be, it often is a lot of work for the architects. Then the tenders come back in by the tender date and time, and this is a very specific thing. And this is a trick question that the architectural practice exam often asks you. You know, if a tender comes in 5 minutes late, can you accept it? The answer is no. Shaking of the head over there. So the answer is that's correct. The answer is no, because a deadline is a deadline. Okay, so this, we have to be fair to everybody who's putting in the price. And if we accept something outside of the conditions that we ourselves have set, that's not a good sign. Once we have all the tenders back in, then the tender committee, which could be just one person, but could be a number of people, then have to get together to look at the tender forms that have been submitted, and then to assess the tenders to see how we feel about it. Quite often in these cases, the best price, the price that we are going to recommend to the client to accept, is not the cheapest priced. Okay, so we have ideas as to how much things should cost, and so we are going to look at these tenders or the prices that come in against this. So if something comes in unreasonably low or really cheap, then that's going to we're going to be suspicious. Either they've screwed up or we've screwed up, and we're going to be confident that we're not going to have screwed up by the production of good documents that limit the amount of screwing up that can happen. So really what we got to do, if we have inexperienced clients, like a lot of domestic clients who are only going to ever build one house or do one big renovation in their lifetimes, is to protect them from themselves. Is we've got to give them good advice to tell them why we think that one tender is preferred and the others are not. Yeah, so in many cases, when you're dealing with domestic architecture, this is fairly clear. Like with my projects, I generally get 3 prices, and if I can get two of those prices to be within 5% of each other, then I know I'm doing. Then I know my documents are doing their work. Um, Builders really rarely say that they don't want to put in a tender. They will always put in a tender. Their way of communicating to you in this kind of context in the domestic market is just to jack up their price if they don't really want to do it. So that, it makes it worth their while if they actually do it. Yeah. So these are the kind of little codes, little things that happen. Now, a variation of the open tender is the select tender. So this works in exactly the same way as the open tender. The only difference here is that we will invite a number of builders to tender for the job. Okay, so it still has the same formality about it: the tender forms, the question and answer period, the deposits, and so on and so forth. And in this case, it is not as transparent as the open tender, but for the stuff that most architects deal with, which is for clients who want to get something built and they don't need any sort of public transparency built into the process, this is a good way to do it. And what a lot of architects do is that they use the builders that they have used before, that they've worked with before, so their systems are relatively known, and they can advise the client as to the builders who should tender, who should provide the tender. Builders often clients often have builders that they want to tender as well. So that also allows the architect to test those builders' skills and prices and references against the ones that are known. So in this case, again, the outcome has to be assessed. It may well be that an architect decides to go with a builder that they've not used before, if all other things being equal. But one does have to have a good stream of projects going through one's office so that you can really be fair to each of your builders. Yes, Nathan.
Who gets the final say, the client or the architect?
Okay, the question was who gets the final say of selecting the tenderer? The client does. Yeah, because at the end of the day, the client will be entering into a contract with the builder. The architect recommends to the client which ones the architect thinks should get the job. But really, ultimately, it's the client's choice, and the client, of course, has to be then responsible for that choice as well. Now, so because it's a selected tender, there's not a public advertisement and all that stuff I've talked about before. Now, I've talked about the advantages in terms of what's good about this system. But it still takes the same amount of work as an open tender, and the same amount of time as an open tender. So while the people that are tendering are known to the architect, it doesn't actually cut out that much work for that in terms of the architect. And of course, as I said, it's no good for systems which need to be transparent. Okay, but if you've got someone, you've got a private individual organization trying to get a building built, they're responsible to no one but themselves. Okay, if their shareholders, if their company and their shareholders require that level of transparency, then they'll go the open tender system. But most of this kind of work is delegated to the management committee or the management to actually do. Now, as I've said, one of the problems of tenders is that they are very formal things and you have no flexibility. And quite often when you're dealing in hot markets, quote unquote, where everybody is really busy and it's actually quite difficult to get a price from builders because everybody has got too much work on. What you might do is a request for quotation. So a request for quotation is essentially exactly the same as a tender, except there is no formal cutoff date. So if a builder needs a bit more time to wait to hear back from their subcontractors or what have you, that's fine. That someone doesn't actually get back to you on time. So you can indicate that you want it back within a certain period, and if they are slightly under, slightly over, that's not going to be something that affects their quotation, if you like. Um,
Sorry, is that just in this, or that's just during the tender process they can let the architect know?
yes, so the architect and the builders giving quotes will keep in touch with each
Yeah.
other as to how mostly the architect will be ringing up and say, Builder Bob, can you, how are you going with my price? If you find some time, we give you extra time, blah, blah, blah. Because our aim really is to get 3 prices.
Yeah.
And so that happens generally in markets when people are really, really busy. So the problem with this is that you may have to wait longer. I've waited I've basically had to wait like up to 3 months before I managed to get some prices of some people, or go to Plan B to get a fourth tenderer because the first the third one didn't want to put one in. So what you need to do here is to make sure that everybody who gives you a quotation gives you a nice, decent time of validity. Yeah, and of course, then this person's second tender will have to wait 3 months before we can give them a decision, and we want them to stand behind their price for that period of time. So that's a minus. The informality means that things can change if things are dragged on for too long. Now, when you look at this kind of thing, you have to remember Robin used to work in procurement for the ACT. She was very high up, so she was procuring the high value and high complexity things. So essentially the buildings. But as she moved up through procurement, she was really looking at all sorts of procurement. So the slides really reflect this. Procurement is or tendering, for asking for tenders for stuff. They ask for tenders for stuff, everything from stationery all the way up to buildings. Now, so at the end of the day, you're still comparing the prices of a number of builders or suppliers, and in that case, just as long as everybody is able to stand by their price while you're doing that assessment, it is as good as a tender. The single select method is just the same as asking for a tender or for a quotation. It's just that you're only talking to one builder about that. So in that case, you give all of your documents to the builder, and the builder then puts in their price, and then once the price is in, then that price is assessed, and there may be a period of negotiation after that point if their price is too high. Okay, so the single select method, you may say that may also happen once you have go through the quotation period, right? So once you get a quotation, you may choose to negotiate with one builder to get the outcomes that you want. You can't do that when you have a formal tender. Okay, when you have a formal tender, at the end of the tender period, you either have to appoint somebody or abandon the process and do it all over again. Okay, so that's the other thing about tenders, is that there's only 2 outcomes from the tender, one of which being don't appoint anybody and don't negotiate with anybody, or to re-tender it. Okay, and once you have abandoned the process, then you can start again, and that may be whatever process you choose but there needs to be a bit of time that goes between the end of the formal tender and the negotiation with the preferred builder. Okay, because it's not fair to basically have a failed tender process from which one of the tenderers then gets an inside line to actually get the job. Yeah, so really the tender is open to that much scrutiny that you actually need to have that sort of transparency and that sort of rigor.
So where does like post-tender negotiation fit into that? So all the prices come back, they're all similar, but you still want to make some variations from there.
So once you have signed a contract with one builder, then you can talk to them about anything you want. So generally, when you have post-tender negotiations, that generally has to go back to all the tenderers. In truth, that's the proper way of doing it. All the tenderers need to be given the same chance to resubmit according to the new conditions. Okay, that's doing it properly. Quite often people don't. Quite often people use the tender process as a way of choosing a builder and then negotiating directly with that builder. But that's not technically right, because you then need to appoint the builder according to the tender documents. Yeah, if you change it, you need to be fair to everybody. You need to give everybody the same chance. Okay, now that is the way it's supposed to be done, but I do know that it's not always the way that it actually is done. And it also depends on what you are negotiating in the after the tender has been awarded. So if you're negotiating on things that don't actually affect the tenders of other tenderers, then it doesn't affect them, so it doesn't matter. But if suddenly you've decided to change the scope hugely, then makes the tender valid from the point of view of the person putting it out. So single select method is still very formal. A variation on that, which is a whole different type of tender, is the direct negotiation. So it is similar to the single select, but the process is much more informal. So really, with the direct negotiation tender model, what it is that you're working with the builder to get to a price, working with one builder to get to a price. So I do this quite often, and that's purely because I work with a few builders that I know are trustworthy, and I'm happy to stake my reputation on their performance. Slightly risky because you never know when things are going to change for a certain builder. Okay, and I have to make this very clear to my clients that this is the case, and they need to share the risk with me. Okay, nothing so far bad has happened, but in life you can never tell what's going to happen. So, but the other thing is that you may have certain clients who do a lot of work with a certain builder, and this may be individuals or corporations, private or individual. Yeah, so private clients or sort of commercial clients that like to work with certain builders, and they're happy to go down that path because there may be a certain expertise, there may be a certain familiarity. So in that case, you don't generally go through a whole sort of tender process with one person. You just generally get them on board from the beginning and work through the process with them, which tends to be a much more collaborative and better process. But you've got to be able to trust them that they're not going to be ripping you off. Now, this we're moving now into kind of variations of tendering, I suppose. Two-stage tendering is really a variation on the open tender, where essentially you use the first stage, an expression of interest, to basically find out a bit more about the people that you might want to shortlist into a standard tender. So the second stage really is the same as the select tender that we talked about before, where there's a number of tenderers, in this case 2, In the first phase of expression of interest, you may do that as a select thing. You may ask a certain number of builders to put in expression of interest, or it may be an open thing. All right. So basically, what that does, the advantages of that is that it allows you to actually see who's available. Whoever puts in a tender, must be someone who's keen to actually put in the tender, and then you can then use the information that you have for that to gauge their qualifications, their ability to complete the building, and use that as a way to get to a short list, to a select tender. Now, the advantages of this kind of system is that it is a really good way to gauge how builders feel about your project when it's an unusual project, when you don't know how builders are actually going to react to it. So this is mostly used for I suppose buildings that you don't build very often, iconic projects, if you like. So things like monuments, Parliament House, things like the Melbourne School of Design that I showed in the client lecture, things like that, which are kind of special buildings, if you like, often go through this process because the process is not ordinary. You don't do it very often. Okay. I suppose things like airports also would go through the same kind of thing, although airports are pretty commercial. So what it means is that because you're only talking to a smaller list, a short list of tenderers, then you're not really also tying up the time of tenderers in spending the resources to actually go through the tender process. Get people to give you their expression of interest, and then so for those who are not that interested or not that qualified, then you can cut them loose and they can move on with their lives. The disadvantage of this is that there's still actually a bit of time taken to get an expression of interest together. So of course here we're talking about getting expressions of interest to tender for a building. But this is also the same kind of process where you go through in the PPP process, which we talked about last week in procurement, where architects have to be involved from an early point of the project. So in the past, before this stuff was really worked out, expressions of interest was really code for architectural competition. Yeah, so people got to put all this unnecessary stuff into the expression of interest in a way for clients to get basically free work. But that has been tightened up quite a lot. And then of course there's probity risks. It's not a very your methodology for shortlisting can then be questioned. Which then puts you in a position where you have to defend all of the decisions that you've made at that time. Okay, so that is the last of the forms of tender, and then now we get to really how tenders get received once they're on their way in. So we're really looking at 1 and 2 envelope tendering. So if we start with 1 envelope tendering, essentially all the information that we ask for is in the 1 envelope. Okay, so really the price and the insurances and the guarantees and the labor and the rates, etc., everything is in the 1 envelope. So not only the ability to do the work and what they're actually going to do is in there, but also the final price. All right, so it's a very simple thing, and if you've already checked them out, then it's something that works very well. the disadvantage of the one envelope system is that essentially assessment teams will go straight to the price, and that can sometimes cloud the decision making process. So for architects, it's architects' duty to actually look at these things in an overall way to be able to best advise their client. But if you've got a client who's it's not their own money and all they're really concerned is about reporting to upstairs that they've got the cheapest price, then the one envelope system is not a very good system because it's all dependent on price and not on all the other things that one has to evaluate. Now, in two envelope tendering, what happens is that the price and the non-price materials are separated out and put in two different envelopes. So the assessment team then assesses the non-price material, who's going to be working on it, what the experience is, what insurances they have in place, what they've got on, how they deal with problems, how they deal with clients, what systems they have in place, all of those things that are really crucial to be able to have a successful completion of a project are assessed first, right? And then from that, you then choose the builder that you want based on that, and then you then go to look at the price only when this process is finished. Now that's not very useful, is it? So basically, we can tell by inferring into the advantages and disadvantages is that it's a structured process where you don't get tempted by the price. You actually go through all the different criteria that you're required that you've set up for yourself, and then you only come to the price afterwards. So this is really a good way of getting the best outcome. The only thing with this is that because you have to look carefully, it's not based on price, you have to look carefully at all the stuff that you need, which means that it may well take longer. Now, a little bit about e-tendering and e-procurement methodologies. This is really quite common nowadays in terms of e-tendering. All it means is that you submit a tender online rather than bringing it round to a certain place and placing it in a tender box. So in the old days, you used to literally have a box, A4 size, and everything and your entire tender was supposed to be A4, put it in an envelope or two envelopes and pop it into the box. So nowadays, all of this stuff is all e-tendering means is that it can be submitted online. But what it also means is that you need to have the right kind of IT infrastructure for these kinds of things to be submitted. And really, it is a backup that you can have both the physical form and the electronic form, much like we have in terms of our own assignment submissions. So it tends to work quite well for that too. And in terms of overseas suppliers, it's good it makes it easier for overseas suppliers to be able to submit tenders in terms of not having to rely on the mail and so on and so forth. Now, of course, this is not always open in the construction industry because of the local certification that's required in the local thing. So overseas suppliers does not generally relate to construction, but in some cases it may. You may need overseas expertise. So you may need overseas builders considering all other things aligned with the right insurances and registrations and so on and so forth. So this kind of system is used quite often in procurement, really not about architecture or construction. It's really more about stationery, maintenance services, smaller things which are more known, things which are simpler, not as complicated as buildings. And then similarly, e-auctions and reverse auctions, these things are, again, things that are not very common in terms of construction, but we kind of need to know about them as a system. And really, it is essentially an auction, an online auction that one has to go into to bid for the provision of services. And really, at the end of the day, the best price is the one that gets the job and or gets the contract. And of course, reverse auctions are the ones where the lowest price are actually the one that gets the job. So this kind of method is certainly not recommended for construction, because that's the very thing that we don't want, is people to undercut each other. So finally, in terms of tender processes, there are many situations or organizations that have panels and standing offers. So what happens is that in this case is that you have basically a panel that has a panel of architects or a panel of builders and so on and so forth, so that when you have that kind of project that you want a tender for, you select those things from the panel. So it's really about pre-qualifications for those things, and it's also a system that allows an organization to be able to get a number of prices from a number of people and still maintain probity. In other words, still allows them to be able to stand by their choices because all these people, because it's quite a transparent process. But there is no guarantee of those people who are on the panel of actually getting the projects. Yeah, so it's in the case of universities, most universities have panels of builders, architects, and other consultants that they use, and they really use that as a way of getting used to certain people. So with architects, if you get onto a panel, a university panel for architectural work, generally they give you small things first and see how you go with them. It's a way of testing your systems in terms of services without having to commit to big things. And for builders, the same thing. They'll bring you in to fit out 1 or 2 rooms, maybe to start with maintenance and move on. And through this testing process, through the panel process, you may then get larger jobs based on that. Okay, but there's no guarantee, because if you're doing a bad job, they're not necessarily going to tell you to be able to improve yourself. Now, so really the panels and standing offers are really a way for suppliers such as builders and architects to be in the running. But and for small things, with standing offers, this may be hourly rates for things. So if something needs to be done, the university can come to a builder and say, this is going to take 6 hours, will you do it? And generally the builder will do it, or they may itemize certain types of work into a rate which they will accept. So we will replace a start wall for X dollars per linear meter. And so once all this stuff is known, it's just a matter of calling them up and saying, this is we've got 5 meters of wall to be replaced. When can you do it? Now, see materials on Moodle. That's not really relevant to us. I haven't quite figured out how to remove it from this presentation, so apologies for that. Okay, are there any questions with regards to tendering?
Probably just one in regards to, I guess, your single select method.
Yeah.
And would you advise that you get a QS report done if you're going to, more so for the client's purpose? I guess, if they're not the ones that are driving that?
Yes. Okay, so it depends on the job. Okay, so certainly the single select method, if it's a larger job, generally you would have a quantity surveyor on there, so that or some way of estimating and measuring the work, so that you have a decent estimate. In the case of residential projects or domestic projects, or single houses and renovations, generally it comes back to the experience of the architect. To be able to give an estimate, an opinion of cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's certainly not anything that's fixed, and an architect generally has to make this constantly clear to the client. In the context of that, generally clients do not want to get quantity surveyors involved because of the cost. So if you've got a larger project and you can afford $3,000 to pay a quantity surveyor, then that's money well spent in the context of a project that may be $1.5–2 million. But when you've got a project that's $200,000, $3,000 starts to become a significant cost within the process. So it's completely up to the client as to what they want to do. Generally, if they're that concerned about cost, then what they will say is let's get a quotation. Let's get 3 quotations. And so the default quantity surveyor is actually the builder who then puts in the price. So if they were concerned about price, they wouldn't go down the single select method. They got to trust you and your choice of builder to be able to go down that path. And how I would do this generally is I would bring the new clients to see the work that the builder I want to do the job that the builder has done for me in the past. Yeah, so go and look to make sure that they're happy with the quality of work, and then I would organize a meeting between the builder and the client to try and build confidence in each other. And then the builder may also then take the client round to other projects they've done, and also provide referees for the work that they have done, which are generally other clients. Yeah, so it's a way of building trust, and all throughout this process, one is emphasizing that this is a best case scenario. And
would you encourage that anyway, even if you were to get 3 quotes, that the builder then meets your client?
Certainly, yes.
Yes. There were.
Yes, but it's more important in this case because there's no options.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And at the end of the day, the contract which we're going to go into is being signed between the builder and the client, and the architect may or may not be involved. But generally, when an architect goes to all this trouble, the architect is going to administer the contract. Any other questions? Yes, Nick.
Is it common or uncommon to, if you respond to the request for tender, to include this sort of contract with an engagement?
That's part of yes. So the kind of contract that is going to be used will be part of the tender documents. So you as a builder, if you're going to answer a tender, then you will know that what the form of contract is going to be, because different forms of contract require different levels of administration, which you go into in the next lecture, and that affects the price. You see, so yes, we'll come back to that in the next lecture. So, do you have a question, or you just?
I was just stretching, but I did actually have a question from before. I just wanted to know how common open tendering was for houses.
It's generally used for larger projects. It's generally used for larger projects and institutional commercial projects where you need that level of transparency. So it's not commonly used for houses.
Yeah,
because
it's strange.
Yeah, because the level of administration on the part of the person running the tender becomes very high. So if you suddenly have to assess 27 tenders rather than 3, then you've done the fees. So it's got to be worthwhile for an open tender. So if you've got something, I would say if you've got something that is going to be 5 million and above, then an open tender might be worthwhile because that level of project is not going to be appropriate for all builders, and you're only appealing to a certain range of builders, which is what you want. So you still, even with an open tender, you still want to try and control the outcome a little bit, and not make too much work for yourself.
Is it, from what I understand, it's open for like public housing projects? Is an open tender process? But there's pre-qualifying people that can respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I'm just confused by the concept of it being in a newspaper.
Well, it's rarely in the newspaper now. Now you just go to the tenders portal, and then everything will be there.
Yeah.
But in the old days, there'd be a little part in the classifieds, which is call for tenders for whatever. But public housing is a really good example because that's a state-run project where they need to justify everything they do to the public, right, or to the electorate, which means that it needs to be absolutely transparent, and everything needs to be worked backwards to the government needs to demonstrate that they've done everything in the most transparent and fair way possible for the best outcome for the public, and still we get disasters.
And this is all like the way architects acting in this, it's driven by like a code of conduct more than law.
It is also driven by law.
Okay.
Because when you run a tender, essentially you are entering into a contract with the tenderer that things will happen in a certain way.
Sure, okay.
And if you don't do it in that way, then you're going to get into strife, and they have grounds to come back at you for being treated unfairly.
Who enforces that?
Well, it's civil law.
It's
It is a form of contract. Yeah. So basically, they'll sue you for not doing the right thing.
Does that go back on your registration potentially, or is that just purely an individual?
It can. Then they can also complain to the board. In which case, you get in trouble with the board. So it's both, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Let's have a quick break, and then we'll go on with the next